helping you with Acorn and RISC-OS computing.
When I went to the Southwest show, I almost missed the RISC-OS bits stand. It was only right at the very end that Andrew mentioned, have you seen the FAST stuff on RISC-OS bits? And I looked at it, went over right at the last minute to have a look and bought one. Let me just introduce myself, if I can work out whether I've got... yes, right. And the idea is I'll talk a bit about performance, explain what the FAST system is about, what happens when you try and build it yourself, and take questions and answers. But I'm quite happy to have questions thrown at me. If there's a burning issue at the time, not a problem. So the aim really is to sort of generate a few questions and discussion. Look at some of the recent hardware and describe what FAST is about. I'll just introduce myself. I've been interested in computer programming since 1972. I'm a chartered mechanical engineer. I had a career in nuclear safety and I'm now retired. I've used RISC-OS to publish several books. I maintain a website and I volunteer on a heritage railway. I've got a printed set of notes which I have carefully not made available to anyone yet, so that they're not distracted flicking through them, but at the end of the talk I'll put them online at that address. So if we're talking about performance, there are various things about a computer that we can see easily. I mean, the raw speed of the processor is usually quoted because people always quote that. But actually, there's some of the different processors, some of the more recent processors are much more efficient than some of the earlier ones. And it's all to do with pipeline cycles and caches. So you're not always able to translate raw speed of the processor into genuine speed, because these other factors come into play. Memory speed does tend to be fairly straightforward in that, however, the memory is clocked more quickly, you'll find it's accessed more quickly. And the other aspect is the filing system, how efficient the filing system is, as well as how fast is the raw storage. So with those ideas, let's look at some recent developments. When the Raspberry Pi came out, there was a SD card filing system available for it, which was pretty crucial, really, because that was its main, other than pen drives, which had been used up until then, SCSI discs, USB, discs, because the SDFS was reasonably quick at the time, and that was written to complement the Raspberry Pi. A few years later, the Titanium came out, and the ARM X6, and a SATA driver was written using ADFS for the Titanium and SCSI for ARM X6. And that was quite a reasonable increase in speed. And then the Pi Model 4B really was quite significantly faster. And it wasn't then until about 2022 that port of RISC-OS onto the Pinebook Pro was up and running. There had been a port onto the Pinebook, but by the time it was ready, the Pinebook was pretty much end of life. And so the Pinebook Pro was really quite a significant advance again. This year, there's been a driver written for the Compute Module 4, taking advantage of the PCI Express slot that's theoretically available on the Pi 4, but is used for USB 3. But the Compute Module 4 brings it out into a proper socket. And we now have SATA available for that, which I'll be talking about. There are other technologies as well. NVMe is another storage technology that is also available on a WaveShare I/O board and on a PCI Express board for the Pi Foundations I/O board. And we keep hearing a lot of talk about native sort of Wi-Fi, which
will go ahead on Easter Day.
Hasn't arrived. And we're also, there's the possibility that RISC-OS might be able to use USB 3 in a faster way, but that is not clear as to when or if that might occur. So those recent developments, now it's very difficult to measure overall performance, and it really does depend on the task. And there are other limitations which might be equally valid.
Go ahead on Sunday,
like screen resolution, for example, because the titanium's limited to 1920 by 1200. Other computers, the Pi 4, for example, isn't. It can drive quite a large, and the ARMX6 can drive quite a large screen. On some machines, the graphics are accelerated. Some have hardware floating point units, but these tend to be a bit difficult to perceive. So you can't always. So sometimes you really have to go back to some of the benchmarks and look for the major differences. So I've done a bit of a graph, and there's a huge amount of information packed onto that graph. But it's basically showing that the Ionics was a moderate improvement on the RISC PC, but significantly over the years there have been improvements in processor speed and memory speed. Sort of tailed off a bit after the titanium was produced, but it's a log graph, so it's a bit deceptive because the move from titanium to the compute module is something approaching a factor of 2 on processor speed and significantly more on memory speed, because that axis is very compressed. So you can see at the right-hand end of the spectrum, the Compute Module 4 and the Pinebook Pro are showing up as the fastest machines at the moment. The storage speed is a little bit, let me try and summarize it. If you look at the dotted line that says SDFS, it shows that as memory speeds and processor speeds have increased a bit, then the SDFS has improved a little. But significant improvement moving from that to SATA, because SATA is more limited by the sort of underlying overheads of the file core system in how it treats data. After all, you're not going to be able to get much faster than RAMFS can do, which uses file core, because that has got no extra physical storage other than just memory chips. So that sort of bounds how far you can get with anything that uses a file core filing system, which does mean that things like FAT32 do have the opportunity to show a bigger speed if they're developed. And you can see the conventional hard disk was doing rather well on virtual RISC PC, because you're using a very much optimized storage system on Windows. But so that graph is trying to illustrate some of the improvements over the years. The right way. Obviously, storage speed is really limited by the hardware you're using. So SDFS isn't going to get much faster because of the clock speed on the bus that it uses. Whereas SATA is pretty close to the theoretical speed on the Compute Module 4. So unless we rewrite file or filing system, we won't get much faster than that. The processor speed in recent times, clock speed isn't the way that processors are being speeded up anymore. Probably for the last 10 years, multi-core has been the way, because there is a limit to how much speed you can use as a raw clock speed, because the electrons fall off the edge of the circuit board tracks and tear holes in the circuit board tracks as you go faster and faster. And RISC-OS only uses one core, so some of those improvements aren't feeding through to RISC-OS. But the memory does run at full clock speed. And RISC PC took enormous benefit from the fact that there was a small memory cache and most programs fitted into it, and that ran a lot faster than the RAM chips on the circuit board. So with those limitations, go the right way again, it's very difficult to compare the different machines. But that is what I've tried to do here. And there's a clear win for the Titanium, the Compute Module 4, and the Pinebook Pro. But there are other aspects are much more likely to influence choice, like whether it's a portable computer or not, what screen size it can drive, how big the case is, and how loud the machine is, which are equally valid concerns. And of course, price, because the price variation is quite significant. The Raspberry Pi is a very low price point, and it's quite difficult to compete with. So let's look at the Pi Model 4 against the Compute Module 4. Because notionally they're the same machine, but in very different forms. The Pi 4B has got all of its interfaces on the circuit board, and it's chosen USB 3 for the fast bit of what it can do, which doesn't benefit RISC-OS very much. If you move to the Compute Module 4, okay, you've got to have a daughter board for it to sit on that will actually allow you to bring out the signals that it produces. But it doesn't have USB 3, but it does have a PCI Express slot that would run at those sorts of speeds. There's a minor problem with RISC-OS, which was quite an awkward one, because when RISC-OS was last at a stable version 5.28, don't think the Compute Module 4, it had either just come out or it hadn't come out. And it's only Fortune that means it all runs on the Compute Module 4. But because the Pi 4B has got PCI Express bus connected to USB 3 sockets, RISC-OS assumes that the PCIe is populated with something and falls over if it isn't. But it looked at first as if it just falls over on the Compute Module 4. It was only when we realised that you could plug anything you like into the PCI Express socket, and RISC-OS would think, oh, there's something there, that's all right, and start up okay. This might get solved in 5.30, but it's there's a workaround that you just need to plug something into the slot on the I/O board. There are various boards available to slot onto the I/O board's PCI Express socket with all sorts of different types of storage or sockets, NVMe, USB 3 sockets, SATA sockets that allow fast storage. But of these, RISC-OS can use the USB 3 at USB 2 speeds, and it can use the SATA, but it can't use NVMe at the moment. I did try a WaveShare I/O board, which is not much bigger than the Pi 4B that the Compute Module 4 sits on, but it has dedicated what would have been the PCIe Express slot to an NVMe socket, which is okay for Linux, but no good for RISC-OS. And of course, the other factor is that you can't buy the Compute Module 4, for that matter, any Raspberry Pi. The only thing that seems to be available in quantity without a problem is the actual I/O board itself, because no one's able to buy Compute Module 4, and therefore no one's buying them. So, what is FAST? I'm running a bit ahead of time here. So, I love the term backronym, which is I think Vince used, because it's not clear whether FAST was ever an acronym until afterwards. But it's FAST, ADFS or AHCI, or available, or any word you like, storage technology. And it's just a trade name, really, used by RISC-OS bits. What it actually is a WaveShare PCIe to SATA board, which costs about 25 or 30 quid, and a ROM to drive it is available as a package with it from RISC-OS bits. Now, the Model 4 range, that's all of the Pi 4B and the Compute Module 4, already has a fast clock for memory and processor, so the only place it falls down for RISC-OS is storage speed. So this addresses that. There are other boards, as I've mentioned, but we don't have an NVMe driver yet, although people are talking about one being written. And I've said that RISC-OS requires the PCI Express board to be populated, otherwise it won't run on the Compute Module 4. Since the 1st of February, RISC-OS will see the eMMC memory on the Compute Module 4 boards that have it. But if you have a Compute Module 4 Lite, that uses an SD card. So it appears quite normally. So, what can you actually get at the moment if you're interested in this area? Well, you can get the I/O board, and the PCIe to SATA boards appear to be in stock with no problems. But the Compute Module 4 itself was sold out, and although Farnell were showing them as available in May, if you actually place an order, it goes back to September. And whether it will be September is anybody's guess. They do say that there'll be new stock expected in the third quarter of this year. And you can get hold of a Compute Module 4 at an inflated price from China on eBay. RISC-OS bits have got some pre-built systems available. They'd obviously got hold of some Compute Modules 4 before they disappeared from sale. So I was fortunate in that in 2020, beginning of 2021, I had 2 I/O boards and 3 Compute Module 4 modules while they were actually available. And they took a month or so to arrive even then. But I wasn't able to do very much with them with RISC-OS. But I built my own case because I had all the bits. So it is quite simple to put together. I mean, you've only got to plug the Compute Module 4 onto the I/O board and plug a board in, and it's all there, really. You do need a 12-volt power supply for SATA. And to make things simple, you're better off with the light version of the Compute Module 4 because that uses the SD card for its storage, and you have to boot off either SD card or eMMC. and it's a bit complicated if you can't see the eMMC after you've booted. And any workaround is actually complicated. But the SD card itself and the ROM on it are supplied by RISC-OS bits, so it should all just work out of the box. So that's the sort. I always make my cases with a polycarbonate. I've got some narrow, long sheets of polycarbonate in various widths, and I just cut it and screw it together with self-tapping screws. So there's the I/O board sitting in a partly completed case with two SATA leads, one for a removable drive and one for a drive that stays in place. You can see on there the PCI Express slot on the I/O board at the bottom left. You can see the 40-pin header. And on the I/O board, you've got a real-time clock and a fan controller, but unfortunately RISC-OS cannot see them. So although they're there, you can't really use them at the moment with RISC-OS. So that was the bare case. Now, I don't know whether you'll notice, there's only two, you can't see them very well in this, but there's only two USB sockets on the I/O board, an Ethernet socket and two HDMI sockets. So one thing that is useful is some extra USB sockets. And there's a hat that will plug onto the, well, there's two, there's a hat that has one socket and input socket and 4 output sockets for USB. And you can connect that to a 10-pin header for the two unused USB sockets on the circuit board, so that you can then offer an extra 2 sockets on the back or another 2 on the side as well. So that's a hat that plugs in to give some more USB sockets. There's a PCI Express to SATA board that plugs into the PCI Express slot to provide you with 4 sockets for SATA connected drives. And it's a good idea to fan and heatsink for the Compute Module 4 board. I've soldered a header to the run pad so I can put a reset switch on, but that's not necessary. So that's a bit more. You can see there's a Compute Module 4 sat on the I/O board. There's the SATA cables connected to the SATA board on the PCI Express slot, and you can see a header. Header on the header is the USB hat. The machine's running, and you can see a screenshot on the back. So, looking at the back panel, there's neatly cut out, of course, on a drilling machine, which is not perfect. I've been thinking of getting something better to cut polycarbonate sheets. I haven't got around to it. But basically, you've got the 2 extra USB sockets, the 2 onboard sockets, the Ethernet socket, the 2 HDMI sockets, and the power input. And you can see that there's a drive bay for a second drive, which you can plug in with the machine turned off and use it to move between machines, because I've got a similar arrangement on the titanium that I put together. So the first thing I wanted to do was to add a fan. The solution to not being able to see the real-time clock on the I/O board is to plug in a CJE Micro's real-time clock board onto the header pins. The fan controller is slightly more awkward because you need to send it speed commands. So if you see looking at the diagram there, if you put some flying leads onto the unused header on the real-time clock board and connect it to the Adafruit board and put together a 4-pin header, 2 pins soldered onto the board and 2 with flying leads, you can produce a 4-pin fan control header that RISC-OS can see because it sits on the GPIO pins. And I've written some software to control a fan. So I think RISC-OS bits have got a fan control board that sits on the header pins, so that they offer a solution for keeping the machine cool as well. So what you can see in this picture is you can see that there's something plugged in at the right-hand end of the 40-pin header, which is actually the real-time clock board. You can just see the top of the fan, the EMC 2101 board, and you can see the flying lead to get the power for the fan. On the compute module 4, that black thing is a combined heatsink and fan, which bolts onto the compute module 4. And in fact, even if you don't drive the fan, that will keep its temperature down to about 40 or 45. But if you drive the fan, it will bring the temperature down to about 37, which is very comfortable. So, what's my impression of this fast system? Well, it's like a Pi 4B in all the software sort of side of things, but the storage is very impressively fast. It's somewhere between titanium and double titanium speeds, depending whether you're doing a load and save or a random access. Close to twice the storage speed of a titanium. But overall, with various things that titanium has, like hardware acceleration and things like that, it's marginally faster for most tasks, and it will be able to control a bigger screen. And of course, it's cheaper. It's much faster than the ARM X6, but it does have a larger footprint than the Pi 4B. At the moment, they're working on a SATA CD drivers. The ROM that is provided by RISC-OS bits can't see eMMC yet, and they're working on that. And I think sound is still an issue on the Pi 4B. But there is lots of bundled software on this. So I think the best thing I can suggest is that please fire away with any questions, and I will do my very best to answer them.
I'm just wondering about an overall size of it. Is it about 6x4x2 inch, something like that, as you've got it configured?
Right. It is.
Can you unshare your screen now, Chris?
Yes, I can. Yes, is that better? Right, I can now see the chat. So, right. Now, it's correct to say that you can only get the ROM that will control the SATA from RISC-OS bits because the software hasn't been fed back yet. On the 1st of, let me think, on about the 20-something of February, no, or 20-something of January, the daily ROMs started to be able to see eMMC, but they saw the fixed as drive 0 and the SD card as drive 4. But 1st of February, that was swapped round and they saw eMMC and SDFS correctly. But the ROM that RISC-OS Bits was developing to drive the SATA board predated those changes, and they tried to put them in, but found that there were problems with trying to put them in because things stopped working. So they went with the ROM they developed, and the next update will probably include eMMC. Now, it's only the Compute Module 4 that has really introduced the issue. eMMC on the Pinebook Pro is just works because they got that working towards the end of last year, I think. Let me just have another look at a few more of the. I think I've got all of the messages. Yes. Yeah. So we've got a bit of a problem really because the hardware is now so cheap. If you look at the I/O board and the Compute Module 4, the I/O board is obviously subsidised because it's something like 26 quid. So it does mean that RISC-OS will be really struggling to have a custom board that will do exactly what we want, because your competition is far too cheap to be able to really make any headway. So that is a bit of an issue for the platform, really, because we don't order things in enough quantity to be able to compete. I'll just go and measure my machine for you.
Thanks.
It needs to be a little bit bigger than the I/O board in order to accommodate the SATA cables, because they're longer than perhaps you'd ideally. So it's 8.5 inches long, which is an inch and a half longer than the I/O board itself, by 3.5 inches, which is the exact width of the I/O board. And to get enough height, it's 3 inches tall. So it's significantly bigger than a Pi 4B, but basically it's not much bigger than the I/O board itself. So it's quite compact, really.
Yeah, good. You were saying about the availability as well. I think there's another comment somewhere in the things. Is it because it's just such fantastic value? Everyone's just bought everything up straight off the bat, or there's a quick initial look, and then everyone's gone, right, that's the one for us. We're having it.
No, not at all. The reason I say that so confidently is that the whole of the Raspberry Pi range is very difficult to get hold of, and has been for a while, and is entirely down to COVID and lockdown, as far as I can see, which generated a shortage of electronic components. And if you're making a board like that, you can't make it with one or two components left off and plug them in later. They've all got to be there for the production line. So it's hit quite badly on production runs of equipment like that. So the Compute Module 4 at the end of 2020 was sporadically available, but you might have to wait a few weeks. But it was available because they'd chosen to produce something ridiculous like 32 different variants of it with different amounts of storage. So
yeah, I saw there were quite a few variations. Yeah.
So that didn't help. But basically, supplies just dried up. The only reason the I/O board is available is that because the supplies of the Compute Module 4 dried up, then people haven't got any need to buy one because you couldn't do anything with it. And other people produced I/O boards. Waveshare produced one, a different footprint, slightly different arrangement of sockets and everything. So they are actually available. It's really frustrating because it's quite a neat machine for RISC-OS, and of course you can't buy them. I haven't yet understood what 4K P60 is, but I think you're talking about.
That'll be the video resolution for 4K video at 60 hertz refresh.
Yeah. Yes, well, I'm not quite sure. I mean, my largest monitor is 3440 by 1440, and it's a huge beast, and it's only very occasionally useful. But I know people always want the best. I don't know whether the Pi 4B can itself can do 4K video. I don't know.
I think it does 4K just on one monitor or two sets of HDMI 1980.
Right. But that's be ready for massive data loss. What's that then?
There's
a comment here that says, be ready for massive data loss. Hope for a fix. Is that the issue with the Pi 3B? Because the work they did on the SDIO seems to have upset some SD cards on the Pi 3B. And they seem to be not talking about that very much and trying to fix it. But it's the story. I'm quite content with 1920 by 1200 or 1080. But it's a bug between the SATA driver and 4K P60. All right, okay. Well, I would be very, very wary of anything that causes data loss. And I think it shouldn't be embarked upon without a lot of testing. There was a lot of testing went on the ARM X6, and it's proved fairly robust. I think I haven't found any difficulties with the SATA driver, and I haven't lost any data, and yes, I'm not very happy about data loss. I like the computers to be reliable. I don't mind them having bugs and crashing as long as they don't destroy data. One thing I don't think has appeared in the overheads for reasons which I can't remember. I did write some software to control the fan and to, as temperature rises, to gradually step up the speed of the fan, and as temperature drops, to gradually step down the speed of the fan. And it does seem to work, so I'm quite pleased about that. Not refined enough to release yet, and it's very specific to my own particular setup. But it does work. So you can sit there with the computer, not doing very much and fairly cool. You give it a task to do, and the temperature starts rising. You leave the fan off, and if you put it onto auto, the fan starts running, and then as the temperature drops, the fan sort of slows down until it goes silent again. So I'm quite pleased that works. I must say, I'm very impressed with the speed, the general feel of the speed of a fast system. And the boot up time, I've got, yes, it's reasonably fast. I think I've got the cold boot time. I don't think I have. No, I've got it on my website. if you give it a static IP address, the only slight delay is while it scans for SATA drive, it does while it's starting up. But it's still reasonably swift. I think there are. Yes, it's the Pinebook Pro that is the fastest startup because the RISC-OS ROM is loaded directly and run directly, and it starts up very swiftly. So the Pinebook Pro is a very fast starter. This Compute Module 4 is not much slower. It's on my website. I can't remember what it is, but I've got the cold boot times for umpteen different machines on my website on the performance page, and it's not too bad. It's very impressive as a machine. I mean, it's look and feel is important, and one of the things I do on as a good handy test is to use something I've written called Ring Bind, which displays pages of a manual and allows you to have an animated graphic of the page turning over, which has proved to challenge RISC-OS quite significantly because it's a very processor intensive and task and storage intensive, and it runs quite nicely on the Pinebook Pro and on the FAST system. No, I'd thoroughly recommend it because it's a significant improvement in speed, but of course it's not that easy to get hold of them. Any more questions?
How much RAM do you actually have at startup? Is it a 4 meg machine, the standard, or 4 gig or whatever? Sorry.
Well, when you're talking about the FAST system here, it's whatever Compute Module 4 you've managed to get hold of, because they've got 1 gig, 2 gig, 4 gig, and 8 gig. The machine I managed to get from China was an 8 gigabyte RAM, of which RISC-OS can only see 4 gigabytes anyway. 32 gigabyte eMMC, which I think they offer 8, 16, or 32, and it has a Wi-Fi on board. And actually, I don't think it makes a huge difference to RISC-OS whether you get a 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabyte, 4 gigabyte RAM, because most things on RISC-OS are happy in 1 gigabyte. 2 gigabyte gives you lots of space for a RAM disk if you want one. So 4 gigabyte is a real luxury.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about RAM disk because with the newer machines, that's sort of the thing to do is set up a big RAM disk straight away and just move stuff around that way, and everything looks faster. And I think that's what they've got. What's it for the Irish web browser? Some of those it loads it into RAM because that's just faster than doing it anywhere else.
And they've removed the 512 megabyte limit on a RAM disk so that you can make the RAM disk use as much of the 4 gigabyte as you want to, which is an improvement. So, yes, it's quite handy. You're compiling a ROM, the RAM disk speeds up the process enormously because you're actually only using memory to do it.
I think it's a thing unique to RISC-OS, isn't it, really? Partially because the programs are small, so unless you're handling shed loads of data, it's a really handy way of speeding things up.
Absolutely, yes. It's I just see someone's checked Farnell's website. Wait, do you mean 78 Compute Module 4?
They've got in stock.
Pardon, sorry.
It's the I/O board they're advertising in stock, not the
Oh, right.
Oh, no, they're easily available at the moment, so don't take any notice of that. You can get the I/O board from most of the suppliers without a problem. And you can even get other manufacturers' I/O boards easily in the same way. You just got nothing to plug onto them, unfortunately. I managed to find some. I think they had 10 in stock in China, but at a rip-off price. So if you look around on eBay, you'll find some scalper will be selling them, but you really don't know what you're going to get. But I did get one that was supposedly brand new, but whether it was genuine or not, I don't know, but it does seem to work. I think it's going to be some months before they become available again.
Yeah, I even found, Computer Exchange, they had a Pi 4 board in, I think it was £10 over retail, despite being second-hand.
Yes, I mean, that's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, I think Andrew Rawnsley has been able to get some, but he's having to pay scalpers' prices on eBay to get them, to be able to sell the Forte machines based on a Pi 4B. Yes, you can get them on eBay, but whether that will continue for very much longer, I don't know. What machine do I currently use for day-to-day use? Well, yeah. Well, I use virtual RISC PC to develop a lot of the software. And I use an ARMX6 for my email. And I use a Forte when I've got something to do that's very intense on processing, that I've just started doing on the fast machine, because that's got a slight edge on speed there, because of the SATA storage, and various Raspberry Pi computers that more for testing software than anything else. So yeah, I tend to use the ARMX6, the virtual RISC PC, and the Forte 2. And the titanium, not so often. I'm not sure why, really. But I have got a titanium as well, and I've got several monitors with switch boxes and mouse and the screen and what have you. So I have to think quite hard when I use a different machine as to which buttons I'm going to press so that I actually see what it's doing. But mainly the ARMX6 and the virtual RISC PC, mainly. I will replace the ARMX6 with the fast machine once I get round to it, but I haven't got round to it yet. I think one of my ARMX6s did blow up and is now relegated to the must do something about this box. Certainly I find that RISC OS is running at a comfortable speed, and I use Impression a lot for producing documents and what have you. I have written up the talk I've given today, and I'll be firing that off to Steve Fryatt in case he wants to use it for a magazine, which describes in a little bit more detail some of the things I've done. But yeah, I think this is a really quite handy development for RISC OS. Yeah, eBay's starting price for the Compute Module 4 seems to be about 150. I paid slightly more than that for a top of the range one. It said made in England. Well, whether it was or not, you're never really sure with China, are you? But,
I believe in the old days, China used to copy stuff from cotton mills, and they'd even copy the manufacturers make.
Yes.
All that sort of stuff on them. So made in Rochdale or something.
Yes, that's right. Well, they had no shame at all about it, and they seem to have got away with it. So, yes, it's no, but I do thoroughly recommend it as a nice, fast RISC OS machine. And you talk nicely to Andy from RISC OS Bits, he'll provide you with the necessary. No, I'm very pleased with it. I'm glad I spotted it at the show because I nearly didn't.
Yeah,
So,
I think the catch for some of us is, I mean, I've got a Pi 3 and the original Pine Book. Those seem fast enough for me, and they're both silent. Whereas anything past that gets a fan on it, which is, compared to some of the PC fans, I'm sure it'd be absolutely nothing. But sometimes you just want to be quiet. So for me, those go fast enough. So I'm not jumped ship yet. I mean, we'll find out, see what's tempting. You can see from the graphs that you've done, which are fantastically comprehensive, how much faster it is. Because I think with the Pis and stuff, he stuck with the SD card, didn't it? I think, is it have a speed thing in tens or something like that, don't they, for the rating of the SD cards?
Yes, it's significantly slower than SATA. One thing I would say is that when I built my titanium, I used a silent power supply based on a toroidal transformer. So there's no fan on my titanium at all, and it runs perfectly okay. So it's completely silent. The fast machine that I've got settles down to the fan running at its slowest speed, and you can't hear it. So that's silent as well. And the only machine that makes a noise is the big beast from Arcom that combines a PC and a titanium in the same case. I can't remember what they call it.
Yes, another one. Yeah.
But the PC has a fan that is stonkingly powerful. Even then, it's not too bad, but I can definitely hear it. But that's the only computer that I can really hear going. The other ones are pretty silent. So, RISC-OS it's good that RISC-OS can, to run without having to have massive cooling. The compute module 4 runs at about 38 degrees with the fan running at its slowest, and it's absolutely whisper quiet at the slowest speed. And I'm quite pleased with that. So I think some of these faster machines are still not particularly noisy.
That's good to hear. Yeah. I suppose the other thing then, if people are looking for it, is whether something has dual head capability. I know it's important for some people. We haven't got a driver yet, have we? I think it's just the titanium that does that as sort of standard.
Well, the titanium, is it more desk that it uses? I haven't tried it myself, but I know it does drive a display where you can put two monitors side by side, and the desktop looks as if it occupies one big screen that size. But I find the Forte 2, which drives a 3440 by 1440, more convenient, really, in a lot of ways. And occasionally I turn the screen sideways on the PC if I want to show an A4 portrait page in filling the full screen. So, but RISC-OS isn't terribly good at a rotated screen because the mouse still moves the wrong way, so to speak.
Right.
So you have to really think what you're going to do with the mouse. But so there are two HDMI sockets on the Compute Module I/O board and the Pi 4B, but I don't know quite whether I'd want to use a two-headed solution. Now, there's an interesting question here. If someone wrote an NVMe driver, what sort of speed increase could RISC-OS gain? And I think part of the answer is that it won't run much faster than SATA because SATA's running almost at the full speed of FileCore because it's running almost at the speed of RAMFS. So unless the NVMe driver has a completely new filing system behind it, like FAT32FS does, because that doesn't use file call, then I think the speed increase that could be gained is no more than you'd get from SATA. Now, that's not quite true, because NVMe is slightly better for random access. And sometimes it's the random access bits that give you the best measure of how fast something is. So, it's until it's written, I suppose, we won't really be sure. But it does have some slight potential for an increase in speed on random access. But the SATA driver on the fast board is very good for that. So I'm not convinced that there'll be a massive increase in speed. Yes, RAMFS is a good measure of how fast file calls likely to be able to behave, and SATA is quite close to that. I have shown it as a separate line on the graph on the article, reasons which I can't remember. I haven't shown it on the overheads, but yes, that is the limitation, really. It's more for convenience that people are thinking of writing an NVMe driver, because the Pinebook Pro has an NVMe socket inside the case. So if you write an NVMe driver, you'll be able to plug a drive in inside the computer that RISC-OS would then be able to see. And some I/O boards offer a dedicated NVMe socket. So it would mean that we would be able to see those. I don't think they'll be any faster than SATA. And certainly not significantly faster, because it's almost certainly going to be a file core filing system. But yes, running somewhere between 38 degrees and 42 degrees centigrade with a fan either stationary or silent, I find the fast systems very, very good. It's the heat sink that makes all the difference. There's a heat sink that clamps onto the Compute Module 4, which is basically a thick sheet of aluminium with a fan mounted on it. But the thick sheet of aluminium and the various stickers that you put on the chips to connect the heat sink to the chips, you don't need to run the fan to actually get the temperature way down from 60 down to 40 something. But if you do run the fan, then it will come down even lower. So that's been very successful. It's the I think it's a wave share 12-volt fan, although they do the same fan in 5 volts and 12 volts. But you need to provide 12 volts to the I/O board if you want to run SATA. Whereas if you don't want to run SATA, you can happily plug in a 5-volt supply to it. Right. Why has USB 3 not been implemented on RISC-OS? Well, that's a very good question, actually. First of all, there is the difference between a USB 2 arrangement and a USB 3 arrangement is that you need something called XHCI, that right, to drive the USB 3, even if you're driving it at USB 2 speeds. So whereas with USB 2, there are various software tricks you can use that mean it will work properly. With the XHCI, the protocol, it's all done in hardware, and what you find is that if you plug a USB hub into titanium, for example, or a machine that's using the XHCI protocol, some of them will work and some of them won't work because some of them are not quite in spec, and the XHCI is much fussier. So it does give problems with certain hubs that work perfectly happily on a Pi 1 or a Pi 2. But when you plug them into a machine with the XHCI protocol, you find they either don't work or don't work fully. Now, USB 3 speeds are quite challenging for RISC OS because they're significantly faster, and I don't think we've managed to make them the drivers efficient enough to be able to handle those speeds. So whereas with Linux you've got hundreds of programmers tinkering around and trying to get things like that working, we've got a tiny number of programmers, and it's a challenge for us. I mean, RISC-RULE have been talking about getting USB 3 working on RISC-OS, but whether we get USB 3 speeds anytime soon is a moot point. I think that the biggest thing on the horizon that's going to cause us problems is the move to 64-bit, because as faster machines are produced, they're likely to have processors that don't bother to implement 32-bit, which means we've got no chance of RISC-OS running natively on them because the instruction set is completely different on 64-bit. So I think that's going to be a bigger looming problem than USB 3 speeds, especially when you have other ways of getting fast storage, like SATA. There's limited resources for development on RISC-OS, and it's got to be targeted right for the things that matter most.
Yeah, I suppose most people know that SATA is what normally your SSDs would plug into, isn't it? So that's like the hard drive equivalent storage in the modern world.
It is, yes. And we have that, and we've had that for some time on RISC-OS because we had that in 2015, machines that were using SATA. Getting it working on a Compute Module 4 on an I/O board should, in principle, have been a reasonably straightforward process. But I mean, these things always take time to iron out the difficulties. But yes, so we've got fast storage available in that way. So devoting resources to getting USB 3 speeds is not an obvious place to I mean, the comment is that there are vast numbers of peripherals use USB 3, but I don't know how many demand those speeds. For example, there's a desktop dock for the Pinebook Pro, and that was designed over 10 years ago using USB 2 protocols, which is perfectly enough for an HDMI screen with a little bit of judder if you're trying to get external HDMI for like a data projector or something. Something based on USB 2 seems to work quite reasonably well, not perfect. And obviously, if you have one designed for USB 3, it would be a better quality because you've got the data transfer rates to cope with rapidly changing screen data. But the USB 2 based one works quite reasonably well. So yes, we're missing out a little bit, but it's probably not a major area of a major issue.
Yeah, I've got one of those dock extenders for my Pinebook, and yes, that gives video out. I think if you're trying to watch movies on it, yes, you'd probably get some stutter along the way, so the USB 3 speed would be better. I suppose what would be useful, because we've got sockets we can't use, if USB 3 can run at USB 2 speeds, so had something that recognised its USB 3 socket, but then throttled it back to a 2, then at least we'll be able to use the sockets rather than having to try and get extenders on some of those things.
Well, RISC OS will drive USB 3 sockets at USB 2 speeds with no problem.
Right.
So it just does that. It just won't drive them at USB 3 speeds.
Right, but can we actually use USB 3 sockets on current equipment?
Yes.
Not?
So
Right.
if you get
I thought we couldn't for some reason, yeah.
If you've got a Pi 4B, you've got 2 USB 2 sockets and 2 USB 3 sockets. And RISC OS will just drive them all at USB 2 speeds. The issue you have is that a few devices won't work on any of the 4 sockets because of the XHCI protocol. I think all 4 have that. So that's a demanding hardware target that not all manufactured equipment meets, but in days gone by, it got away with it. It is something, for example, on the titanium, if you plug something into the USB socket, you may find it doesn't work, but that's because the thing you've plugged in isn't quite compliant with the spec. It's not that the machine isn't compliant, it's that the peripheral isn't compliant. Mind you, I'm sure that's what Spro would say anyway. But
no,
yes,
I think it's true. There's a thing called class compliance, isn't there, for I think PC and Mac stuff where it doesn't need drivers. So presuming those are better hardware options to plug in.
Yeah, and I think it was something that could be fixed in software on USB 2. So if you had problems, a tweak to the software would actually make it work. But with the XHCI, you cannot tweak it in software to make it work. It's a hardware issue. So it either works or it doesn't. And some of the stuff on the market is mediocre.
Sounds as though I may have got lucky. I've been having a lot of problems with the ARM-X6 connected to a KVM over USB, and it did all sorts of weird things when you switch to it sometimes. And then I put an external hard disk in for backup, USB SATA connector plugged into one of the USB ports, and that was also odd. So following discussions with Andrew and various other people, I bought a USB 3 hub, plugged both of them into it, and no problems at all now.
Yes, and I think what you're finding there is that you've now got a hub that is in spec, and you're not getting problems, whereas before one of the items probably wasn't in spec. It's not really RISC OS's fault on this one. It's a hardware issue, as I say. But
I suppose it's got parallel with the old CD drives. Originally, you could only use certain CD drives with the Acorn IDE thing, wasn't it? Because I think it was very spec fussy. But then again, you had dealers, and the dealers bought the stuff that worked, didn't they? They knew.
I think that was the big thing that has changed in recent times. When Acorn produced a computer, you got a known package of stuff that all work together because all the hardware worked together. As you get to the stage of people making up their own systems, you get such diversity out there that you start to encounter difficulties. Yeah. It's. I mean, the Raspberry Pi had a lot of. There are a lot of posts about which SD cards work well with the Raspberry Pi and things like that. And basically, some of the cheap and nasty SD cards didn't work very well. Quite apart from the fact that some of them were designed for cameras and only really wanted to write data chunk after chunk as you took a photo rather than randomly. And so we're very slow. So, this is inevitable. Once you get a lot of different bits of hardware out there, you start to say this doesn't work with this bit and that doesn't work with that bit.
Yeah, I think this is why people use Macs to some extent, isn't it? Because it's a known system. Okay, you're limited, but you know all these things work because they're approved, aren't they, centrally, effectively?
Yes, that's one way of approaching it, isn't it? Yes, design your own connector that no one else uses and force everyone to use it. Yes.
Yeah, I think they're going to USB-C though, aren't they now?
Yes, only because they're basically being directed that way. Yes, yeah.
Having said that, I've got an old iPad, well, 2 different versions of iPad with different connectors, but it's a multi-connector thing that you don't get on all the Android stuff. So it lets you do a lot of stuff, particularly with audio and video, different connections, HDMI, VGA and all that sort of stuff, and audio in and out, which generally just isn't available on the Android. So you can see why people want to use them for music, particularly.
Oh yes. And I think sound is an area where RISC-OS has fallen behind because it's quite difficult to get sound working on a new machine. Not least because RISC-OS's approach to sound is rather individualistic. I mean, it was fine 20 years ago, but we haven't really moved on. So some of the new machines can't do sound yet, which is quite a big limitation for some people.
Yeah, I think I was surprised to find I don't know if it's the Pinebook Pro. They haven't even got Linux to sort out the sound on that yet, on certain distributions, which tells its own story, doesn't it?
Absolutely, because they've got more programmers than we have, and it does demonstrate that the issue is not something that's an easy one to resolve. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, have we got any more questions? Because we've hit 9 o'clock. The talk was a bit shorter than I thought it would be. So I've had to pad it with questions and answers, but we have got to 9 o'clock. So if there are any more questions, I'll have a stab at answering them. But if not, we can just go into general discussion.
Yeah, we don't have a 9 o'clock watershed. It's okay.
Yes.
I was just going to say that the ARMX6, our comp did some work on the ARMX6, so the sound will work in and out. I forget who did it. 2 people were involved with using a module to improve the USB, but for some reason, WROCC wouldn't add it to the main source tree because it was not based on NetBSD sound protocol, and they were waiting for NetBSD to update their sound protocol to do what our company already developed with somebody else, and that's one reason we haven't moved forward with sound. Somebody was supposed to be working on standardizing all the sound utilities, but for some reason WROCC seem to want everything to be based on NetBSD, and like the network stack, for instance, that they've done it using FreeBSD or something, and for some reason, it's open source. They don't want to.
I think basically what they have with that one, Chris, is they've got a resource that they can use and modify slightly rather than reinventing the wheel. So I think that's the way they want to do that. But as far as well with the ARMX6, basically there was a major client, which we've never been told about. I'd love to find out all these things eventually. And that was to do with audio out, particularly on the ARMX6. And I think they had to get the audio in to do the audio out as part of the system we're selling. I think it was, I don't know the name of the manufacturer, but someone who was doing one of these hard drive zero loss, CD recorders. So I think they were selling for about 600 quid per unit, but basically it's an ARMX6 in a box with a hard drive. So, but don't quote me on that.
But the similar thing has happened on the network stack, where it's been based on BSD something by risk cost developments, but Rule want it based on BSD something else. And I think there are some opportunities here for efficiency, which are not being taken. Yeah,
I think it's come up on a few different things. It is a tricky thing. I can see what both of them doing. There's the commercial side and there's the non-commercial side. In a way, what we should all do is pay the non-commercial side to have a talk to the commercial side, and as long as they're not outlandish, take on those things and just throw them into the OS, and that'll keep a lot of people happy. I can understand there are problems, and I'm not a programmer by any stretch of the imagination. So they may be talking about theoretical things that may never happen. But for us users, I think we'd be looking at, if you've got Wi-Fi working and you've got this and that, can we have them? Right.
Well, I think the interesting one will be you have two different network stacks.
Right.
Whichever one implements Wi-Fi first will kill off the other one. I think that's a likely outcome. And we don't know yet which one's going to win the race.
No. Yes. It is a catch, isn't it? I mean, we'd love to have millions of people being paid millions of pounds to do millions of things, but we know the user base isn't big enough for that. So you have to put up with some compromises somewhere along the way.
And of course, the big thing, the other thing is that at one time, the hardware manufacturers would be able to make enough money to drive the operating system to do the things they need it to do. Whereas I think at the moment, the volumes are too small for any of that to happen. So there isn't enough money to be made in RISC OS to actually go out there and commission the things that need to be done.
Yeah, perhaps we should all give a birthday present to a bounty scheme. That could be one way around it, couldn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. But I agree. I mean, it does seem a pity that we're spending time developing two different network stacks rather than focusing on using our resources in the most efficient way possible. But that's the way it is. So what goodies will there be at Wakefield? Well, I think there'll be fast systems. I think two stands at Wakefield, I think, had fast machines on. I think the desktop, the presentations in the theatre, I think there were 3 people at the Southwest show doing presentations for the Pinebook Pro and one of the docking units driving a data projector, which is a big improvement for RISC OS to be able to have a portable machine that can drive a data projector. And who knows what else there'll be.
Yeah, I think my first portable, it's not a laptop thing. I used to work at Leeds University, and in summer we used to check out the projectors and lots of different connections. And I used to take my A9 home along, which is very useful. It's only sort of VGA out. We could test VGA and sound at different resolutions. And I think it started up in about 30 seconds or less than that. So, if you got something, picture and the sound straight off you go and test them. So that's quite a useful thing.
Yes. Well, one of the problems with the Southwest show is that I looked at the Compsys Acorn announce on the Friday morning before the show, and there was very little there. Various tweets, which I don't do, had been issued, and then there was some news issued after I got to the hotel on the Friday evening, And of course, I wasn't looking by then. So the Southwest show there wasn't really a lot of signposting before the show as to what was going to be there. So I'm hoping for the Wakefield show, people post the news in good time so you can actually read it before travelling.
Yeah, I think there's pretty much for everybody, there's a website link. Chris will be able to tell us more about this one. But on the show thing, we've got the show theatre list, which I think has 4 people on it. But I think every stand pretty much has a website. Is that right, Chris?
If you mean the text on the exhibitor site, most of them have filled in, but one or two haven't. Rick's been looking after that side of the website for me. There are 1 or 2 things possibly in the pipeline. I can't say much. They said about had hints that are going to be, if they can get finished in time, there might be 1 or 2 surprises. But that's about all I can say safely on that at the moment, because it's nothing official.
Yeah.
You signed all the NDAs in invisible ink.
Yeah. It's always a bad thing to pre-announce stuff that then doesn't quite make it, because it sort of raises expectations and then drops them again. So it's I must admit, I always focus on what's currently there rather than what might be round the corner.
Mm.
Yeah, I think Andy Marks has done a reasonable thing with his FAST systems, in that he's put how far along he is with them, and he updates that, I think, every week or so, doesn't he? So, I mean, some things are at 95%, some are like 20%. So, you know when you might want to buy.
Yes.
I believe, from what I believe there's going to be several new versions of software released at the show from several different suppliers. I believe the Pine Book Pro will be in action on certainly in the show theatre. They certainly be on their very big stand our Comfort got. I think the Pinball 2 will get a new release, because I've just helped fix a bug, obscure bug that's affected. So that may be on general release, and they may even have Irish may become on general release. It's still a little bit borderline whether they're going to release it this for Wakefield or London.
I think they gave away. Did they give away free SD cards with it on at the Southwest show?
They kind of did or kind of didn't, depending how you look at it. They were not terribly keen on handing out free SD cards to people who already had RISC-OS, because the whole idea of it was to hand them out at jams to people who might otherwise never see RISC-OS.
Mm.
So they were making a small charge at the Southwest show just to cover the cost of the SD card itself. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fine, because I think currently it's 50 quid on store, isn't it? And I've had an old update because I've got a Pine Book original. So that's definitely better than the first version of Iris that I got with that.
Yeah, so I think they're looking at Iris, they just want a donation.
Yeah.
And because it's not yet finished. So while they're still spending money on it, they really need to be bringing money in, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
The problem with Iris is a standard problem. The web browsers are continuously being updated, modified, new protocols coming in all the time. It's a never-ending battle to keep up with it. And to be honest, I suspect it'll be in permanent beta because of the issues. But I think eventually they will make it available just to everybody. And we just have to hope they carry on supporting it. It's a massive project, and we're trying to keep up with the changes.
Yeah, I don't know about anyone else. I mean, I'd be happy to pay 20 quid for it, in a better form than I've got on my Pine Book, as I say, which is sort of like, I think, last year's November version or something like that. 50 might bulk out, 20, I think most people would be happy to pay, wouldn't they?
I think it's one of those things where they've set themselves a target that they're going to release it when it's finished, but that's going to be a very subjective judgment as to when you decide it is finished, because it'll just carry on developing.
Yeah, I know I've got a couple of old devices, well, a couple of iPads of varying ages, and it's interesting seeing how many sites start to fall over time. So I think the newest one's about 8 years old, and the older one's about 10. And one of the ones they keep asking for is, what's it? You haven't got a certificate for a site. So that's something that comes up a lot on them. So I think is it SSLs that's changed in recent years. So they're all doing that. And yeah, you do need something newish to keep up. Well, there's certain websites are absolute nightmares. I think Argos is the worst one, as far as I can work out.
I do remember ringing one company up saying to them, I'm having great difficulty with your website. And I said, oh, it only works in Internet Explorer. And I thought, oh, brilliant. You know.
Well, with
Right,
Argos,
yeah.
now I had problems with Argos and I reported it. What I found with experimenting, I had to change the user agent down to the oldest possible version that it would support, down to, I think it was right down to the lowest possible setting, and it then worked. Apparently, Argos used, I think it's Cloudflare for part of their system, and they are very aggressive at checking what user agent you're using and will block anything it doesn't like. Royal Mail website is another one that can be for going for tracking. It works sometimes and doesn't work other times. And when I looked at the detail, it had been written for IE10 and they haven't bothered updating it since.
Yeah, I love that Microsoft monopoly theory. Yeah. Probably should create a worst site for Riscos and the world. I think there are some already out there, aren't there? But it's surprising that someone like Argos and Royal Mail, don't look at all the compatibility things, do they?
Yeah.
They presumably pay a programmer, and if they want to save a bit of money, they don't pay him quite so much.
Yeah, there's an argument that says that if you've lost 10% of your customers because you can't get on your website, you've lost 10% of your customers.
Absolutely.
So I'd say pay them on 10% more, and they might write it for some other web browsers.
Yes, it's. I'm afraid I have to confess I use a PC for my browsing rather than RISC-OS. But
I use Iris as my main browser now, and most of the time anyway. And the current version is the most stable version we've had. I haven't had it, touch wood. It hasn't crashed on me in months.
What's the date you've got on that version, Chris? Because I think mine's last year sometime, because it was a freebie upgrade because I had a Pinebook.
Yeah. They have done an older version of the Pine Browse and 4T Browse, or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Which is cut down version of a slightly older version of the current Iris. But the full Iris, I've been using it. Don't think the only thing I've had is some problems with cut and pasting or copying into a field that you want to drop text in, say for the show, for the exhibitor thing. I've had to go to NetSurf, which will work with it. If you try and drop the text into the box, it didn't work. It tried to open another page and drop the text in. It opens a scrap file basically. They're trying to work out why it's doing that with certain boxes. Presumably it's something to do with the HTML.
Right.
yes.
No, that's actually something. Is it worth? You done all these speed checks on presumably building ROMs and graphics and transfer of data and what have you. Could you test them out on a website? Would that tell you a thing with the same web browser?
Yeah. You're opening Pandora's box nicely. Yeah. I think Iris running in RAM is pretty good, but your big problem when you're measuring performance is that far more important is the compatibility, so it actually shows what the author intended, rather than just raw speed, because otherwise you're going back to Webster or Fresco.
Yeah, because some things definitely format differently on different browsers. I'd say, well, that's just the person who's written. It's not checked on different browsers, haven't they?
Well, it's got complicated now because some sites adapt themselves if they think you're on a one of these PDA type things, like an Android or something, rather than a computer.
Right.
So they don't always get that right. So, you know, measuring performance is incredibly subjective.
Yeah.
Oh, no, definitely writing for mobile devices is a different kettle of fish. You know, that's one of the things that Steve was saying about our website. You know, you have to maintain sensible compatibility with different devices with different screen sizes and ratios and what have you. So, yeah.
Well, I wrote my website a little while ago in 2005, and it's fine. I'm not intending to change it just because computers have changed. I don't have time.
No, if it works, leave it. I'd say, yeah.
I think Iris is in a dilemma because if they sell it, they'll have to provide support for everything it does slightly wrongly. Whereas if they make it available for free, they can say we've made it available for free, and yes, it does have one or two glitches, but that's how it is. So I think there's quite a barrier to being able to sell it as a finished product.
Yeah, well, they did do originally a CD with it on, and well as what was the other browser they added with it?
Otter browser, was it?
Cryptzilla, was it? And they were doing it for £20 at one time. So yes, it might be that they've done it, and I think they were giving it away at the Southwest show, weren't they? If we went to the stand or something.
They did say for the Southwest show to encourage people to come along. They would hand it out for nothing. Yes, it was the Iris browser they were happy to hand out for nothing at the Southwest show if you turned up physically. Yes.
Yeah. That's another way around it. It could have it for free, then I've paid £10 for a yearly update. You still get some money in that way, aren't you?
Yeah, well, we've had a RISC-I Select tried that approach, and it fell down as soon as they slowed up producing updates.
Yeah.
Impression has also ended up in the same issue with if you sort of slow down on producing upgrades, people stop sending you money, and you then can't afford to do upgrades.
Yeah, the subscription model is what everybody else on all the other platforms is starting basically doing, isn't it? Mainly on the Windows side, but that seems to be the model everybody seems to be pushing for because it's regular money coming in.
Yes, I don't like
any improvements.
Yeah. I'll be rather cynical and say some of the improvements that are being made on some software, particularly on Windows, don't actually look to me as if it's actually better when they finish the improvement. I look at it and think, I could do this more conveniently on the previous system. But hey-ho.
I think that was Windows paradigm. We'll just change stuff and it won't be any better. I think that's how they work.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for proper drag and drop that's consistent on Windows. I don't think we'll ever get it because we do move sometimes and it's replaced on others, isn't it? I can never remember which one's which, so I always do it a long way
Move
around.
from one folder to another, and the folders are both on the same drive. then it
Right.
gets moved. But if they're on separate drives, then it gets copied.
And when
And
it
you
gets really, really interesting is when you're trying to copy a file, but you let go of it over the top of a directory rather than in the root of, well, whatever you want it to go. And you can't then quite work out which directory you dropped it over. So you then struggle to find where the hell it's gone. But it has gone because it's been moved. I find that incredibly frustrating.
I still think that. Sorry.
You should try supporting primary school children when that happens. The RM systems used for the primaries had a folder for each pupil, but they're all under one effective user. So if a pupil tried to open his folder and inadvertently dragged it and dropped it onto the next pupil, his folder disappeared.
Yep. It's a rotten feature that you don't seem to be able to turn off.
No.
That's the joy of Windows, I think.
Removing the delete permission on the directory, which stopped Word working.
Oh, right.
When Word works, it writes to a temporary file, and when you save it, renames the temporary file. Rename is add and delete. You can't delete, you can't rename.
You do wonder sometimes, don't you? And this is why we use WROCC, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, the thing I find about Windows, it's quite easy to just save, and then I have no idea where it's saved to, because it's wherever you were last on whatever day that was that you've forgotten.
Tell me about it.
A number of times I've had to go into an application and save again in order to look and see where it's saved, so I can move it.
Yeah, I find that irritating because I use BBC Basic for Windows for a lot of things, and you load something from a particular directory. If you click save, it will save it back where you got it from. If you click save as, it will look in the directory when you last saved something rather than the directory from which you last loaded something. And I find that so incredibly annoying.
It's absolutely
That's
bonkers.
how Windows works.
I'm glad it's not just me.
No, it's. I mean, you sometimes wonder, would the whole world be on a 2-day week if they had a filing system like WROCC? And I think the answer is yes, they would, because they wouldn't spend the other 3 days trying to find what they did yesterday. Which is why they have to have your most recent files that you have no idea where they are.
Yes, that's right. They've taken a feature that's poor, left it as it is, and then put some sort of fudgy workaround that works some of the time for you to be able to find the stuff you've saved recently. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Well, I say my favourite thing is when anyone sees WROCC for the first time, and occasionally people pop into my eyes and see it and go, "What is that?" And I go, "Yeah, it works like it should do, and it did do when it started. It's only got slightly better because it was fantastic to start off with, as opposed to drag and drop, still not working on Windows and Mac in any sensible way whatsoever." I'm speaking slightly out of my hat on the Mac. I've never really used one, but a one mouse button, we had 3 many years ago. Please catch up. And there you go. Rant over. Must be time for a brew. Yep. Thanks for the talk, and I shall leave you for this evening.
You think Windows is bad for saving files in funny places? I've never figured out half the time where Android apps put their files.
Oh, well, they're all in date order. That's the other thing, because that's all it knows about. It only knows the date, and that's probably not in British format anyway. So,
if you think Android is bad, the iPhone is vastly worse, because that doesn't let you save anything in any recognizable place as far as I can see. And if you want to save something in one application and then look at it in another one, that's way beyond it.
That sounds like Android too.
Apple doesn't think you should need to do that, therefore you won't be able to do it.
Yeah, well, what's it? They made a big feature of. Oh, you can have 2 programs side by side. Oh, whoopee doo! I usually have about 8 windows open when I'm doing something trivial because my mind works like that. You know, so there's some note somewhere as a file and modifying a picture or something while I'm thinking of something else, and just going between all the windows. And when I was working at Leeds, it's so funny. One of the guys had got 3 screens. He said, "No, I think I need 4." And I'm going, "No, you just need a frigging sensible filing system that isn't Windows."
Right, I'm going to stop the recording.